And Malaysia's top court upholds the guilty conviction for former Prime Minister Najib Razak. That will send him to jail for 12 years on charges of corruption related to the 1MDB financial scandal. Najib accuses the court of failing to give him a fair trial as hundreds rally in his support. Now for more on Najib Razak's failure to overturn his conviction, we're joined now by Hasan Jafri. He's founder and managing director of HJ Advisory. Good evening, Mr. Jafri. It's good to see you. Najib said back in July 2020 on the initial sentencing that it wasn't the end of the world. He still had the appeals process and he hoped to see success through that to upend his conviction. Now, those legal avenues, they've been exhausted. It's an unprecedented decision by the court, but it's not unexpected, is it?
Hi, Don. Yes, it is unprecedented in the sense that no prime minister has ever been convicted before, although Anwar Ibrahim was as deputy prime minister. It's unexpected in the sense that if you go back to the time when the the PH government was in power, they made a very strategic decision, the Attorney General at that time, Tan Sri Tommy Thomas, that they're going to push the SRC international trial first as the main trial and the 1MDB trial later. Because in their view, at that point, and proven correctly by the outcome in the courts today, that this trial was a more straightforward trial. And I think what we've seen today is that that whole process, the legal process, has been exhausted. The evidence, the arguments that were presented by PM Najib's legal team, they were fairly consistent to the arguments that had been rejected before. And so there's no surprise, unless there was some sort of a smoking gun, there was no surprise in terms of how this court would have reacted to those arguments.
So a straightforward trial, as you say, but one that Najib Razak felt he was biased against, that he didn't receive a fair trial. Now talk is swirling about the possibility of maybe even a pardon coming from Malaysia's longer-serving leader. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad has said there might be this 50-50 chance. I mean, those are extremely good odds if that were to be true. But can Najib make the argument that a pardon is in the national interest? Because that's what he would have to do to persuade the Agong to do so.
I think it is in his political interest, obviously, to get a pardon. But I don't think it's as straightforward a process at this point. Number one, the 1MDB trial is still underway. It is at the High Court. It is still being heard. There's no clarity in terms of when a decision would be made on this. Now, remember, the SRC international trial, for which he's now in jail, and the 1MDB trials, they're both linked. So a pardon happening at a time when a related trial is underway is probably not possible, number one. But pardons are not necessarily legal per se. They are more political decisions to be made. And the environment in Malaysia is so uncertain at this point in time, especially in the last few years, that nothing can be ruled out. Having said that, I think two things have to be considered. One is whether Umno is going to be in power when the next elections are held, and what influence does would Najib continue to have within the party first, right? Number two, and I think it's a fairly well-tested tactic that has been used in many other cases. Najib is 69 this year. If there were to be a pardon in a few years' time, once all the legal cases related to 1MDB have been concluded, he's going to be in his early 70s. And health grounds or age could be factors that could be considered for him to be pardoned.
Well, he still does command a strong supporter base in Umno. So even with his legal battles, he is arguably the only Umno heavyweight that perhaps stands a chance of succeeding Mr. Ismail Sabri, who is not part of Umno's mainstream. Now, if Umno were to become the largest party in 2023, would it be surprising to you, Mr. Jafri, to witness a resurrection of his political career here? Could he do it?
No, I think that window is too tight, too narrow, because there are other trials underway right now. Umno can use him as an election tool, they can continue to say, or the parts of UMNO can continue to say that he was wrongly convicted, and that appeal that he does have with the electorate, they can galvanize that. But I don't think that him being in jail would benefit UMNO much, right? Number one. Number two, you've got to remember that UMNO is a very fractured party right now. There are multiple factions. There's a faction of UMNO that's in government. That faction does not want early elections. There's a faction which is outside the government, which does want an early election. But even within that, as we saw yesterday, when there was an emergency meeting called of the of UMNO's national leadership and its grassroots leadership, the turnout was not so great. So that just underscores that there is a split within UMNO, which makes it very difficult for them to go into the next GE as a very unified entity.
Mr. Jafri, thank you very much for your perspectives this evening. Hasan Jafri there from HJ Advisory.